Anything can kill you if done correctly. Like when I was a kid, I didn't go swimming, I went almost drowning. That was my day at the beach. Have you noticed the pattern that we Jews have got the wimpiest names for our summer camps? Ramah, Surprise Lake, Hill. You know where non-Jewish kids go to camp? Camp Arrowhead. Camp Kill a Bear. I went to Machane Ethel Rosenzweig for 3 summers.
Hello, I'm Joel Sanchez, and welcome to the Jewish Channel special on Jews of Color. I'm here with writer and blogger of Memoirs of a Dominicana, Aliza Hausman, publisher and writer, Akira Ohiso, the rapper, writer, and activist known as Y Love, Yitz Jordan, and founder of Jews of Color education and advocacy group Ayecha, Yavila McCoy. How can a white Ashkenazi know what obstacles Jews of color face? One way to try to find out is the Ashkenazi Privilege Checklist, a list of statements that illustrate white Ashkenazi privilege and that define the difference between being a white Ashkenazi Jew and a Jew of color. Examples of white Ashkenazi privilege statements on the list include, "My rabbi never questions that I'm Jewish," and "I can walk into my synagogue and feel that other Jews don't see me as an outsider." Akira, what one item on the list stands out the most for you?
As I was learning to become Jewish, I think going to a synagogue was a very frightening experience for me. And it was almost like at a party when the record scratches and everyone kind of turns to look. That's how it kind of feels on an everyday basis. And there would be times I'd be sitting in the service and I'd kind of go like this, and there'd be a dozen people staring at me. So
Called the gust of wind phenomenon. As soon as you walk in, a gust of wind must have come in because everybody goes like this.
Are you one of us? What is he doing here? Does he even know Hebrew? Like, I mean.
Well, I also had an experience where I would go to an Orthodox shul and they usually have security there. And
Yes.
A lot of times the security guards would, people would be just walking in, and then I'd walk up and they'd be like, "Can you kind of stand to the side and let's just get a little check here?" And my father-in-law is standing there, and just as if this is normal, and very uncomfortable feeling.
Don't wear black and white because then people might hand you their keys and their coats.
You're the
'Cause
hell.
that has actually happened
That
to me.
totally happened to me. I was at a kiddush one time, and all the little kids started coming up and giving me their dirty plates. And I was like, I'm looking around, are you serious?
If there's a Hispanic maid in the room, there have been times where people forget my name and will call me by the maid's name.
Right.
So what are some more examples of people or institutions proudly thinking that they're not racist, but then
I think.
figure out that they are racist?
Well, my husband and my in-laws went to look for apartments together, and they didn't take me. And we have a Jewish real estate agent, and she says, "Where did you move from?" "Washington Heights." "Oh, there's a lot of Hispanic people there." And my husband says, "Yeah," and she's like, "Well, don't worry, there aren't that many Hispanic people here." Mm-hmm. And like, there's no conception like this is not appropriate, and they have to say, my husband says, "Well, there will be now."
Right. And I mean, okay, that's like actively, really, I can't believe you said that type of racist. But a lot of it isn't out and out racism. It's not about racism trying to attack someone. It's just like an extreme level of insensitivity. Like, you would never have said this if I was white type of thing.
The collective unconsciousness of whiteness as privilege is really what really gets in the way. When I was at the GA, the General Assembly, I went there with a panel similar to this of Jewish leaders of color. And we went to our panel, it was a plenary, and we had the woman who was organizing the session come up to a line of 6 Jews of color and ask us to move because the speakers were going to be sitting there. Now, at the time when that happened, I said to her politely, "We are the speakers." And I watched her go 3 shades of purple as she tried to pull those words back in. Now, she was doing her job. That wasn't her in any way acting out to say, well, Jews of color couldn't possibly be the speakers. But that unconscious thought in her mind, as she was scurrying to make everything ready, is what allowed 7 people who, for the first time ever, had come to the GA as Jews of color to present to a community. That's how they started their experience. Right. So it's a subtlety, but it has consequences.
And where do those assumptions come from?
I think there's a collective unconsciousness of whiteness within the Jewish community. It doesn't belong here. It definitely is not supported by history. It's definitely not supported by fact. But that's what privilege does. Privilege allows you to feel as if your identity is dominant, and therefore you don't have to question it, and you don't have to think about how it rubs against others. And we run into white privilege in the Jewish community all the time.
And it also doesn't have a place in Judaism. It doesn't have its roots in Jewish teachings or Jewish texts. So the idea of attaching importance and privilege and dominance to being lighter skinned just as something that would have been foreign to Judaism, I think it's an American invention.
In Europe, they were a race. And they were considered a race, and in some places in Europe, like Russia, it's still a race, where it's stamped on your passport.
On an everyday level, this unconscious, that this white privilege, how can we engage that conversation? I think I sometimes find that if I'm let go, I can get very angry and upset and rant. But there's a part of me that also believes, do we completely blame, say, the Ashkenazi population for how they feel if it's unconscious? I mean, how do we engage that and have a conversation about it?
The issue is not that it's unconscious. It's the effect, the impact, and the impact that it's having is that, I automatically feel left out. I show up at any Jewish event, and my Jewishness is questioned. I'm being stared at, and so I think part of what needs to happen is awareness. They need to see Jews of color as Jews. We need to see more Jews of color in just your daily Hebrew school, books.
Right. There just has to be a disconnect between the words Jew and white. Like it's been said in the media, Jews are the most liberal subset of white America. They're not a subset of white America.
But I think there's a problem with divorcing it from each other, because on a constant basis, when I explain to someone, I go out and talk about racism and I talk about white privilege, and I tell a Jew, you have white privilege, they're like, no, I'm a minority. I'm like you. I'm not white. And I'm like, but you are, and you have access to things. I mean, you have the privilege of, sitting somewhere and not worrying about being treated like you're the maid or somebody changing their seats on the subway because they're scared of you.
But there is truth to that. Like vis-a-vis white Christian America, Jews are a minority. Jews aren't white.
Well, that has to do with Christian privilege. You have a privilege as a Christian person in this country. People understand, Christmas, Easter.
What we're really talking about here is internalized anti-Semitism, because I feel like if Jews hadn't been hit by anti-Semitism, telling them that they had to create hierarchies of value between themselves and non-Jews to prove their value to the world, maybe they wouldn't have ever taken the next step, was to start creating hierarchies of value between Jew and Jew, which is where you come in as a Jew of color. We're coming in on the tail
it's
of
a survival.
It's
a survival mechanism, I think. I think that part of historically Judaism, that's what it is. You turn inward, and I think people of color coming into the Jewish religion, I think it's very fearful. Yeah. I mean, it puts into question Jewish survival.